and we're excited to be able to share with you some ideas and concepts that we've been working on related to science policy engagement. Thank you all for being here. Next slide, Andrew, you want to get us started? Today's agenda is going to look like this. It's going to be an action-packed hour. We have about 5 minutes where we'll introduce ourselves. We'll talk a little bit about science policy and background and how we came to this point in this project that we're working on. And Andrew's going to give you some information about an exercise we're going to do around developing a policy action plan. And we're going to introduce a platform that we're developing to assist with folks who are interested in policy. And then we're going to ask for some feedback from everyone who's with us today. So that's pretty much the agenda, and we're looking forward to getting right into it. So here we go. I'm Jamie Vernon, Executive Director and CEO of Sigma Xi and publisher of American Scientist magazine. And I've been at Sigma Xi since 2014. I've been Executive Director since 2017. And one of the things that I have wanted to do for Sigma Xi is to enhance our role in the policy process. And so this presentation today gives you some idea of the direction that we're going in this area. Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. So my name is Andrew George. I am currently a Civic Science Fellow. I'm one of about 20 of us across the country in different organizations and entities at the intersection of science and society. My placement is with Sigma Xi. I'm on an 18-month fellowship to lead this development of the platform that you'll see later. But my background is from in graduate school until now, I've been very interested in the intersection of science and policy. And while there, I helped establish the North Carolina STEM Policy Fellowship, which Jamie will talk about later. And then I spent a few years as a consultant working in climate and environmental policy at the federal level. And so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to, it's great to see everyone. I'm excited for the session, and I'm going to turn it back over to Jamie to give us a little bit of a background. Actually, no, we're going to hear a little bit about where you're from.
Yeah. Let's get a little bit of feedback from you all. We have a Slido here where you can type in slido.com and enter your hashtag SciPol, or you can click the link in the chat, and this will allow you to tell us where you're coming in from. Where are you attending from?
Yeah, and for those of you who are unfamiliar, we will be using this later in the session to capture some of the feedback. You will also be able to, as you can see, the chat feature is open, and we'll be monitoring that as well. But ideally, we're going to try and capture from the Slido. I see we've got a couple respondents. Hot Springs, Arkansas. Okay. Silver Spring, Iowa. Excellent. Not Silver Spring, Iowa, but Silver Spring and Iowa. Raleigh, Vermont. All right. We've got about
seven. The great thing about ARIS, there are people from all over.
That's right.
Everyone's focused on broader impacts.
Oh, Michigan. We've got a Youper in the house. Okay. All right. That's
Andrew's
awesome.
From Michigan, so he knows that part of the country.
Peninsula of Michigan. We'll talk
Ames,
later.
Iowa. All right.
Awesome.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. It's nice for us to be able to connect across such great distances, and the beauty of technology is on full display today. So thank you for being here. Now we're going to talk a little bit about this policy process that everyone's interested in. So first, Sigma Xi is the Honor Society for Science and Engineering. We've been around since 1886. I like to say we've been around as long as Coca-Cola. And our mission is really to enhance the health of the research enterprise, foster integrity in science and engineering, and promote the public's understanding of science. But I always emphasize the last part of our mission, which is for the purpose of improving the human condition. And it's hard to imagine improving the human condition if we leave science in the lab. We have to get it out there into the world and use it for important purposes. And policy is one of the broader impacts pathways for people to translate their science for impact into the real world. Okay, Andrew. So just to give you a little background, there are recent developments in the policy area, at least at the state level. So today's session is going to focus on state level. And for those of you who are aware, in 2018, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation funded several feasibility studies to determine if it was feasible to have state level science policy fellowships in 9 states across the country. And this was based on the program in California, CCST, has a state level policy fellowship, and that led to an expansion of state level fellowships. Andrew, who's with us today, was part of the North Carolina team that was looking into whether or not North Carolina would be a good place for a fellowship. And ultimately that his research and his hard work in finding funding led to the establishment of the North Carolina STEM Policy Fellowship in 2020. And at the same time, Sigma Xi was one of the contenders for hosting that fellowship. Ultimately, the North Carolina Sea Grant became the host, the administrator of the fellowship, and they approached Sigma Xi to develop a few virtual discussions and trainings on science communication and policy engagement. And so that led to our relationship as an organization with state level policy. So some of the observations we made when we were developing those trainings and discussions were that there's an increasing interest among scientists, particularly young scientists, in the connection or the intersection between science and policy. There's a need for increased awareness and better understanding of the policy process so scientists can be more effective and engaging. The existing systems are exclusionary. They're not only exclusionary in terms of racial and gender and other demographics, but also how scientists can engage. Most of the programs that allow for scientists to engage require scientists to leave the bench and become a full-time fellow. And it's not clear how an active researcher can actually contribute their expertise to the development of science policy. There's also no centralized organizational entity for state-level science policy. And then there are plenty of opportunities to increase equitable access. And we believe that we've put together something that can enhance greater or increase access to all groups and demographics. Okay, Andrew? So in terms of the first observation, increasing interest among scientists, it's obvious that scientists are trying to engage with policy. And you can see that by the proliferation of groups related to this. Student groups on campuses, AAAS has its national level fellowships, now these expanding state fellowships, and then organizations like Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally, the National Science Policy Network. All of these groups are cropping up and telling us that scientists want to be engaged, and they're providing resources as much as possible. The next observation is that there needs to be a greater awareness of some of the details of participating in policy. So a lot of scientists conflate politics with policy, and we know that these are very different processes. And so policy is really, politics can help us achieve policy, but policy is really a different animal in its own right. There's also a distinction between national, state, and local policy. And a lot of the community focuses on what happens at the national level, but there's a great need for more involvement of scientists at the state and local level, and we want to facilitate that. Then there are at least 3 different ways of engaging in policy. There's science for policy, where you're actually lending expertise, scientific expertise, to make policy better. So using the research to inform the policy solutions. Then there's policy for science, which is how do we fund science? Who does science? Where is science done? What are the problems that science is focused on? And then there's advocacy, where we use science to advance social issues that we want to be addressed. And so clarifying these for scientists as they choose their path into the policy process is important, and that's something we're working on. Okay, number 3. We talked about the exclusionary systems of policy. And so if you're familiar with policy, you've probably heard of the iron triangle. It's essentially the relationships between interest groups that have a focus on a specific area of policy, and they influence Congress as well as the bureaucracy, the executive branch. And then there's obviously this interconnection between bureaucracy and Congress. But if you don't know where to insert yourself or your expertise into this process, this feels like a very exclusive community. And it really does come down to who you know. And because of that, we have learned from legislators that they don't always look for the best science. They look for someone they have a relationship with or someone that they've been introduced to. And it's not always the appropriate person to be guiding legislation. So we feel that we can increase the participation, make it more equitable, and give more people an opportunity to engage in policy. There's really no centralized organizational entity for state level policy. There's a variety of organizations that have popped up. Engineers and scientists acting locally is really out there ahead of creating a network of scientists to engage, but they're primarily in California, and they do lend themselves to other states, but it's not a national robust organization that's organizing. And then AAAS has its local science engagement network. Union of Concerned Scientists does a lot of advocacy work. National Science Policy Network is connecting scientists who have an interest in policy. And then there's projects like the Day One Project at the Federation of American Scientists that are essentially policy accelerators. So folks can write brief memos, submit them, and they can be shared on Capitol Hill, but primarily in a national format. And then there's obviously this network of state policy fellowships that's not centrally organized. They're all acting autonomously. So the final observation is really that because of the existing system, there is a huge opportunity to increase equitable access. A lot of people have been kept out of the process, and we believe that more equitable access will lead to better policy. So a self-guided platform for learning and connecting to policy networks could help level that playing field, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So in the last couple of years, or in the last year or so, the Sigma Xi developed something called the Science Policy Boot Camp, where we provide training in the summer for the North Carolina Science Policy or STEM Policy Fellows. But this is really a deep dive into what state policy looks like. And this led to, and the learning that we drew from the development of the Policy Bootcamp led to us receiving the funding for a Civic Science Fellow. And that supports Andrew to develop a digital platform to improve policy engagement for scientists and policymakers. And so I'm going to hand this over to Andrew in a few minutes, and he's going to give you a rundown on that. But the goals for today as we move forward are to conduct a little exercise for engaging in policy, just to give you some idea or allow you some time to think about how you would approach policy. And then we'll introduce you to a mock-up of a tool that we've developed to assist in policy, and then get your input on how to improve that tool. And then we'll describe some future opportunities to contribute. Okay, so for this Slido, I'm happy to take any questions from anyone who's in the room. Anything I've covered so far that you have questions about, I'm happy to answer those questions. And if not, we'll be able to move right into the exercise with Andrew.
Yeah, we'll give it an uncomfortably long amount of time for you all to get used to the technology, click on the chat feature, you know, any burning questions? Okay, I feel like that pause was awkward enough. Good.
Thanks, Andrew.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Jamie, for the context and the overall setting for what we're going to work on today. And so, as Jamie mentioned, there are a number of ways to engage in policy, some of them not obvious initially, but we want to give you a chance to, with the resources at your disposal, with the networks that you have, the experience that you have, to essentially jump into trying to articulate a policy area that you might be interested in for the state level. And so the activity is going to be somewhat rapid fire. We're going to be breaking it down into a couple 4-minute chunks where you'll have a chance to open a Google Doc, Notes app, wherever you want to document your thoughts. We want to give you a chance to actually try to summarize essentially a policy opportunity and actions you might be able to take. So first things first, you've got to identify a topic. All right. So we're going to give you 4 minutes. You have 4 minutes to identify a state level. This is a very important aspect. We've got plenty of national level things, but let's zoom in a little bit and think about a state level context. We had a lot of states represented today. We had Michigan, we had Iowa, we had Maryland. Y'all are going to have different things. And so try to come up with about 100 words that describe that issue. Now, it's something you can already be interested in. You already know a lot about, but just try to document about 100 words for that, just the context for that policy issue. Okay, so we've got through our first minute and you've articulated, let's say 30 words, 40 words, 50 words, who knows, about your context. And the next thing that we want to do is we want to give you this sort of science communication practice. The next request or action for you is to take that 100 words that you wrote and try to now really crystallize it into just 15 words or less. So what is the heart of the issue that you're focused on? And so try to summarize that in 15 minutes or less. And so for this, I'm just going to set a timer on my phone. You'll have silence. We're just going to take about 2 minutes for you to have an opportunity to really summarize what you just worked on. All right, wonderful. So now we've broken it down into about 15 words or less. And so we've got a pretty good background context, and we've got sort of a really crystallization of what is the actual issue. And now we want to add a little bit more context to this particular plan of action. Helpful context for policymakers and also for scientists is to understand who's impacted by no action. So you've set the context, but now we need to attach it to a person, a community, who's impacted if we don't do something about what we just outlined. Also really important, of course, as scientists, is how can science improve the situation? Where are the places that science could be useful to helping inform this problem or issue? And then finally, not one person can ever fix this problem. And so who needs to be involved to address the issue? Who are the people that are already talking about it, already involved, or who isn't involved that could make a difference? And so we want you to take about 4 minutes to try and think through these 3 questions as it relates to the 15-word summary that you just finished. And so we'll go ahead, we're going to go back to our relaxing timer. So for some of you, it may just be a great time to meditate on this. And so we've got about 4 more minutes. We're going to go ahead and cut you off a little early and move on to some reflections. So you all have essentially articulated a really fast policy action plan. And some of this is from real context. Are you going to be asked to do it in 15 minutes normally? No. But there is a lot of a different pace within the policy world that is important to recognize in terms of what you can provide or access within a certain time frame. I definitely had moments as a consultant where I would have to provide things in timeframes of an hour, and you've got to do the best that you can, right? And so part of the purpose of the fast pace was to get us to think about the context of the policymakers too. As a scientist, you want both cultures are important to understand and embrace. So with all of that said, I'm going to hand it over to Jamie to manage a little bit of our discussion here, sharing out from the group. I hope you all are ready. Those of you who put stuff in chat, I think you've raised your hand unofficially to participate. But Jamie, go ahead.
Yeah, having said that, Julie, you got a head start on that first question and then the summary of it. Would you be willing to share with us the issue that you were interested in and maybe the 15-word summary?
Sure. Let's see. So the issue was around fire evacuation and family safety, because I'm in Oregon, and it was a bit of a, I'm trying to not use nice words. It was a bit of a disaster here with families displaced and a lot of Oregonians wanting to help, but not really knowing how they could plug in or what they could do. It got kind of reduced to like giving people old mattresses, which wasn't really all that helpful for the displaced families. So the 15 word was Oregonians Unite for rapid response to support health and safety of families displaced by fire. And I don't know if you wanted me to go further.
Yeah, well, let's talk about it, because that's interesting. You know, even something of that very, very fundamental level, I guess there's a question of what's the scientist's role in that policy.
Yeah. So I think from my point of view as a social scientist, what was missing was an understanding of what was the need, how do resources move, how do people want to engage, and what constitutes a feeling of shelter, full bellies and safety for the families displaced. So it really felt like that was missing. Wasn't anybody who really understood how resources, social services move in order to achieve that kind of shelter and safety need that was so dramatically underserved during those fires.
Right. And so in thinking about how to get a policy around this implemented, did you have any challenges of thinking about where you go next? how do you get your social science contribution into this solution?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there were some attempts to create like apps to get services, but they didn't account for what the families actually needed or were willing to access, right? So I think that there's a co-development step between the families that have been impacted by fire in the past. And then, people who can develop tools that move resources around and understanding the moving of resources, and then the local and health and safety folks. So there was some state level activity. But now that we've been through this experience for a couple years in a row, it seems like something co-developed with the families who actually have experienced the need is what's the next elegant step is.
Great. And so did you know who specifically to talk to in order to influence what was happening?
In the moment or looking forward?
Even now, where would you go? Where would you go to make sure that we have a better response in the future?
Yeah, so I think for something like this, I'd be looking for state legislature champions to get it going.
And do you have a connection? Do you know who to call or how to contact them?
I do. Yeah.
Great. So, and that's based on personal research, or is that based on?
That's based on my son being on a basketball team with the state legislators' stepson.
That's excellent. That is a perfect example of one of the things that Andrew and I have observed is that a lot of times the pathway into the policy process is someone who knows someone. And you have that connection, and not everyone has those connections. Not everyone's on that basketball team, or even in the community that has that legislator at that school or on that team. So these are some of the things that have come to our awareness as we've worked through this policy process. So that's great. Would anyone else like to share before we move? Thank you, Julie. That was great, and it sounds like you're already doing great work in that area. Would anyone else like to share their issue? And maybe we can jump ahead and say, do you know how you're going to jump in to the process, or do you not know how to get started? Amy, you did tell us that you finished writing yours early, so maybe you have some thoughts.
I'm not sure about that particular question, Jamie, but my isn't it kind of where I come from and where I grew up. I grew up in rural West Virginia, and I think a lot about the environment there. And one of my big questions was, and this is both kind of a national as well as a state question, but one of my policy issues is how do you get more young people, especially interested in both activism around science, particularly the environment, and how do you get young people really interested in these types of careers in policy? And I think that those things start very young, where kids can both have and develop a love of science, but can understand that there are lots of things that you can do with science besides be a scientist, right? So that was kind of like my big question. And, it kind of forces us to think about both, kids getting excited about science, but also, kids being excited about, writing and argument and again, activism and, doing things within your own community and what that actually looks like and what can happen when you do that. And that, again, going back to where I was raised, kind of like being an environmentalist in West Virginia is kind of like a bad word, right? Because so much of the state depends on coal and timber and all these extractive industries, now natural gas, but those things can coexist, right? And again, these were the things that were popping up in my mind for me in terms of big kind of policy questions and how you get young people, especially interested in these types of careers. And even as average citizens, that you can be an activist and what you can do, with that and what that looks like. So those were like a lot of the things that I was noodling on in my document.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the policy question would be, how do you promote this engagement with younger people, with students? And so
Right.
that might come down to civics education. And so if you're talking
Sure.
about policy, we would want to understand who's influencing policy, education policy, so that they can emphasize the importance of this particular curriculum in the classroom, right? So I think that that's sort of the path, but then the question is, well, who is that and how do I have those conversations? So notice that we're focusing on, where do I get started? If I have a policy issue, where do I get started? Because that's really what we're talking about today, is how do we help scientists recognize their expertise and what they can contribute to policy, and then insert themselves into the process. And so that's a great point there, Amy, and an important issue. And, you know, I guess it would be addressed by education policy.
Yeah, for sure.
Great. Well, Andrew, do you want to talk about how we would like to help people who are interested in doing this?
I would love to. I would love to. So I'm excited to share a little bit about what I've been working on, what we've been working on here as part of the Civic Science Fellowship and Sigma Xi. And so Jamie talked a lot about sort of leading up until 2021. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing for the last 8 months to try to understand and build something that would be useful. So Julie, you kind of touched on this, right? Building it with the people. And so you're part of the process. You all are part of building it with us today. This is one of our attempts to get input. You'll have a couple. So first things first, the goal of my fellowship, this project, is to develop a digital platform that fosters effective and sustainable collaborations between scientists and policymakers, specifically starting in North Carolina. So we are focused on the state level. And we have a couple of things that we feel distinguish this effort from others that, you know, Jamie talked about at the beginning of this conversation. And they're in 4 different areas. One is the structure. So the goals that we set out to develop are, we want this platform to be simple, we want it to be convenient, and we want it to be able to tailor information that gets a user towards meaningful action, right? So that's kind of the process that we outlined above already for the workshop and activity, is to like get you from educating you about some of the activities, but at the end of the day, we want you to do something with that knowledge. We want you to go off and create something in the world, right? The purpose is that we want to illuminate the many different places that you could be involved, and beyond just the legislative, specifically the executive and the judicial branches are huge places. Amy, you talked about environment. There's so much in terms of the judicial process. There's so much in the executive that are probably better places to engage if you're interested in those than necessarily a legislative bill. But most of the focus at the national and even at state level is almost exclusively on the legislative process, even though policy happens in all 3 branches of the government at the national and state level. The audience, most of the tools are built for public policy researchers or people who are already steeped in and very knowledgeable about the policy process, but there weren't a lot of tools that were built for platforms built specifically for scientists and researchers who, as Jamie mentioned, don't necessarily want to leave their research efforts, but they want to be involved in policy. And so they're very curious and interested in engaging. And so across all career levels, we hope to be able to provide a platform that helps people engage in the places that are meaningful to them. And then finally, as I already alluded to, there's a lot of effort at the national level, but there's not nearly enough effort at the state and local level to provide these resources that scientists could provide. And there's a greater need, right? Because states and local governments have less resources, especially in terms of research capacity, scientists and engineers and social scientists can actually have a much larger and more direct impact if they act at the state and local level than they probably would at the federal level. So those are the things that sort of drove our initial scoping of the project. And so we took this on a really small roadshow with some state agencies and some legislators and some people in higher education who work in the policy process, and conducted a number of interviews to reality test whether or not the opportunities that we had identified were real, if people could actually be involved in them, and develop this idea of a roadmap that I'll show you in a little bit. Additionally, a place where you all can actually provide some ongoing active input and contribute to our perspectives about what scientists want to do related to policy is a civic science survey that we launched earlier this month. It can be found here at the SurveyMonkey link. And I will attempt to put that in the chat before we go. Don't go fill out the survey right now. Stay here. I mean, if you do, that's cool too. But the goal is for us to be able to understand the needs and the hopes and the interests of the scientists and what kind of resources would be actually useful for you to be able to engage in the policy process. Where do you feel uncomfortable with it? Where do you feel comfortable already? We don't need to build things for that. And so that's one of the other activities that's ongoing. And I'm excited to share a few initial results. We've had almost 400 people fill out the survey already across a number of different career stages. You're probably interested in who those people are, but the breakdown so far is we've had a lot of people who have PhDs, unsurprisingly. We have 70% are from academia. We do have a portion who are from think tanks or consulting or the government. Not as many as we'd like. We're still hoping for that. So share that with your colleagues who you think would be interested. And then the career stage that we have the most of is more in the late career. We do have early career. We've gotten some insights from that, but most of our career stage or respondents are later in their career. We'd like to expand on that so we can take a little bit more depth or insights from the data. But I'll share a little bit about what we were excited to see. We didn't know what to expect necessarily, but almost 60% of people who responded said that they felt that they could apply their research to inform policy decisions either at the national, state, or local level. And so this was exciting because we weren't sure that scientists necessarily wanted to or thought their research would be policy relevant, but it turns out that at least 60% think it is. And a similar percentage actually are interested in doing so. And so when we break that down by career stage, you can see that mid-career, and this sort of averages out and looks the same for late career, has a general across the board interest, a similar interest at each category, left being not at all interested, and this is percentages, and then the right being very interested. And so there's at least almost half of the population is very interested in applying or interested in applying their expertise. And Amy, you'll like this because this speaks to the point you were just trying to make. Early career scientists, however, if you look at their distribution, very, very much interested in applying their expertise to policy. So we thought this was really interesting to separate out by career stage, that the early career scientists, young professionals, are very excited about this idea, very interested in trying to contribute to the policymaking process. And so just a quick comparison, I think you got it the first time, but clearly a difference in career stage. But we're hoping to target this early career group as well as the other later career individuals as we develop the platform. And then the final thing that I wanted to share before we jump into a demo is, or a mock-up, is that we asked essentially what was the hardest part about engaging. And what we overwhelmingly saw was that connecting with the people that are part of the process, the right people in the process, was overwhelmingly the response. Now, there's aspects of learning, that was underrepresented, but still in the detailed responses, the qualitative responses, it was pretty clear that it was a little bit of learning more about who you should even talk to be able to connect to the right person. And so that we've been building the platform around this concept of being able to connect to the opportunities and curation that works for you. So with that, without further ado, what you've all been waiting for, I hope, we're going to go through the platform mockup. And I want to just quickly state we are sharing this with you before we are ready, because we think it's important to get your input and get everyone's input and thoughts on how this develops. And it is just a mockup. So it is not a functional platform at this point. This is just our ideas about what we think the platform could and should look like as we move forward. And so I'll try to run through this quickly because we are definitely running out of time. But not too quick that I don't give you a good feel. All right, so you would sign in, you would be able to create your login, but as we talked about, different opportunities fit for different career stages. So as you first come in, you're going to answer a couple questions. The first one is, what career stage are you at? We're going to say for now, I'm a young professional. So I'll click on the young professional. What branch of government are you interested in? A lot of people think the legislative branch, like we said, but I'm going to say for me, I'm very excited. I got to spend 3 years in the working with the executive, the federal level, and I think there's a lot of opportunities there. So I'm going to pick the executive branch. And then finally, as Jamie talked about, the 3 different areas that we focus on are science for policy, policy for science, or science advocacy. You may not know what that is, but we hope we provide a little bit of additional context so you can make the right choice or an initial choice, but you can always go back and change these answers later if your interests change. And so for now, we're going to pick science for policy, because also this was the overwhelming response by survey respondents. Almost everyone was interested in this. And so once we do that, it's going to launch you to the policy roadmap. And so this is one of those places where we've captured a number of the input points where a scientist could engage. And the goal here is that you can find more information about how you might want to be engaged in this particular area. So one example is over here on the right is advisory committees. So on each of these nodes, you would be able to see a little bit more information. And then as you actually engage with this, and if this is something you want to learn more about, you go to a more detailed page where it shows you an overview of what it would be like to engage, and then talks through some of the helpful skills that you might want to have in order to engage with the process effectively. And so here we've got, relationship building. We talked a lot about this. We hope that this will be a place where others can contribute their courses and their content that they've all developed. We want this to be centralized in a place where we can find it in one shop, so disparately set up across so many different organizations. And so hopefully this could be a home for those places and those courses that already exist. And then additionally, one of the main things that we're really excited about is around this idea of connecting to opportunities that fit for you. And so what we've tried to develop, you've met Jamie and I briefly, but one of the things that you'd be able to do through this platform, there's so many opportunities that exist in spreadsheets everywhere, right? But we want to be able to curate them for things that actually fit your interests. And so here, you'd be able to review opportunities. Right here, we've got an opportunity for Jamie Vernon to help the North Carolina Department of Commerce. And so I'm going to say Jamie is always willing to help whenever there's a challenge. So I'm going to say, go ahead. Yes, we're going to recommend this opportunity for Jamie. And then we've got me. I'm not going to ask you guys whether you think I should. Maybe my science communication could use a little bit more help. We didn't make it on time. So we're going to say, yes, I'm going to get to go through that opportunity as well. And so you'd have opportunities each day or overall that you could recommend for other people to participate in. And so that's essentially the brief mock-up of our platform. Is the main features being this roadmap, courses that you can work on, and then of course the places where you can connect to curated opportunities that we've identified. And so to give some real context about the fact that these opportunities exist, I will quickly just do a link out and say for the advisory boards and commissions, there are actually currently in North Carolina, there are about 365 open positions on advisory boards and commissions that people can apply for and or be nominated for. So this is one of those things where there are real tomorrow opportunities that we want to be able to put in front of people where they can be engaged in the policy process. All right. So we've left ourselves almost no minutes for these questions, but we will rapid fire your gut reactions. If you go back to Slido, what was it that you liked about the platform mockup? If you could enter just your initial thoughts there. And then the next question is, what did you wish for? Or what would you wish for about the platform that you didn't see that would be really helpful for you? I saw you come off of mute. Amy, did you want to verbally contribute?
No, I was just going to say, as folks are filling out the questions on Slido, were there any direct questions for Jamie or for Andrew? You could even pop them in the chat if you want. We only have a couple of minutes.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to give like 30 more seconds for this question as you all type, because we also want to know what you didn't see that you wish you saw, what you were expecting to see. Awesome. Okay. Next question. Okay. Great question, Amy. We will address that in somewhat vague terms, but we are hoping to have and this will be the closeout of the session, and Jamie will talk a little bit about this too. The next opportunity to engage with this, and ideally we actually just on Friday, not as polished as this, we got our first deployment of the platform that is not ready for others to engage with, but is getting closer. And so we're hoping to be able to have something in November for the I4 conference that Jamie will talk a little bit about, where we can have either another focus group and or an engaging and active participation with the platform. Ooh, awesome, Carolyn. Actually, that's a great question, and I will attempt to put the SurveyMonkey link in the chat. There's two ways that you can stay in the loop. One is if you email me, I will put you on the list, sigmasci.org, myself or Jamie. And then the final thing is the survey. There's an option to check on the survey at the very end if you want to be either in a focus group or if you want to be a beta tester for once we release the platform, or other opportunity, or just want to be informed about the listserv. So there's an opportunity to add that as well. So this is a teaser video for the platform, and also hopefully getting you excited about I4, the International Forum on Research Excellence. Uh-oh.
All right, thank you, Andrew, and thank you, everyone. We're at the 1 o'clock, now 1:01. I know we're a minute late, but we want to thank you for your attention today and let you know the next opportunity for you to give feedback on this platform will be in November at the I4 conference. I've dropped the link to the conference in the chat. The idea is for us to continue to engage the community of folks, broader impacts, folks in particular, and those who care about translating science for society. And so this conference is focused on research excellence, but expanding the definition of research excellence to include broader impacts, and that includes policy, obviously. So we hope we'll see you there, and check us out, and feel free to email Andrew or me to ask any follow-up questions, or we can even take them now if Amy can stick around for another minute. So thank you all for your attention.
And I really want to thank Jamie and Andrew for presenting today, and for Sigma Xi being such a great partner to ARIS and the work that we're trying to do. And, really appreciate you all being part of this summit as well. So thank you so much. And we look forward to supporting your efforts moving forward. But yeah, if anybody else has any questions, I'm happy to stay on for a minute.
Okay, well, we can give them their time back. And thank you again for your attention. It was great to share with you today.